Hello and welcome, this is ProTaleDev and we're looking at Dungeon Architect again, and this is going to be a much shorter video than usual. This is partly because the thing I've been working on is taking a little bit long, but also I've been working on optimizing a lot of scripts, a lot of coding, and I'm going to show one of those things, one of the scripts that I'm going to be optimizing in a second. So the thing that I've done is I've replaced the green square that would appear on these specific squares that's on the grid. You can still see the frame texture, like right here you can see me moving it around, and that's just on the grid, but this has actually been changed now. So instead of when you clicked on one of these you would see an image of a sprite that matched the shop. Now instead what you're going to see is you're going to see a blueprint, which is what I'm calling these buildings when they're sort of transparent, and they don't really have anything on, they're just there as a demonstration of what's going to be built. So if I click on a house right here, you can see immediately, if I just quickly zoom in right here, and I click on a house again, you can see that we've got a little bit of a faded out version of the house. If I click the tower, you'll see the same. It's like a little bit blurred out. You'll see the same. It's a little bit transparent. You can see the floor, and it's the same thing for all of these. We've also made sure that I've got the placement correct as well. So if I quickly, I don't know, get rid of maybe these two. Let's quickly get off this. Quickly get rid of these two and place down this building. You can see that it can now slot in correct place. You can also see the X's, which is where the path is indicated when you place it. Now it will rotate, but for the most part this is just what it looks like. This is just to help the player know where it's going to be placed. Now all of the buildings do have this. So we have the shop, which is the basic. If I quickly get rid of some of these, we also have the secondary version, a little bit bigger, third version, and then the final one, which is the market. And again, you can see all of the paths where they all connect, just when they're being ready to be slotted. Maybe they're a little bit too not transparent enough, but for now that's what they look like. Probably can get rid of this grid as well, this actual grid that's on here, because it's not as necessary as it was before. And that's not the only thing that we have. We have a bunch of other ones, like the farm is also transparent texture with the model. We've also got the dungeons. We've also got the production. We've also got this one, the scenery. Unfortunately, it's rotating one of the trees because I've not removed the rotation code on it. Then we've also got the paths, which at the moment it's only just one. Now if I quickly look at this in the actual prefabs, what you'll see is that if we go into let's say the dungeon, you'll see that we've got our standard dungeon prefabs, but these are actually their own prefabs. The reason is because this way I can edit it and control it a little bit better, but it's all it is an object that's blank, has no code on it, so it's not going to be too big of an issue. It's also static, so it's not going to have too much, it's not going to lower performance too much. It's also only there when you've clicked on a button, so there'll only be one object of these instantiated along with the player. And so as you can see, all it is just slight transparency of the original version. So if I just go in here, see the actual version, and it's the same with this one, just transparent, replacing the current one which has all the code and stuff. And it's the same thing for all of them. Really there isn't much to it. It's very, very simple, but it did take a while to do. It did take a while to actually put all this together and to create these for every single one and then place it into our placement script. Now the placement script has also been altered massively, essentially because we've gotten rid of all the sprite related code, because we're not using sprites anymore to handle that selection of when we're clicking on buttons in the shop. Essentially that code has been removed and replaced with how we would place an object in the world if it was, say, part of the dungeon. So that code has now been altered to be similar to the dungeon code we had a long time ago. And as you can see, when we're writing here, instead our specific objects, this is what would happen in our dungeon. We would have a specific prefab icon, which is our prefabs that are transparent, and they would be set as a build icon prefab, which is our standard one that appears and disappears when we click on a specific button. and it's just rewriting that object over and over with different things, and instead of it just being in the dungeon, it's now on the paths, on the objects that are in the overworld as well. So the next thing I've been working on is pretty much the coding aspect. So you'll see here that the actual scripts aren't actually taking too much power. You'll notice immediately when I go in the profiler, when I want to break things down, I'll use this profiler. I mentioned it in a video or two ago, but I'll use this profiler to find out where some of the big problems are with the code and the performance, and I'll specifically look at scripts because scripts are the easiest to alter. That won't affect the visual aspect of the game too much. Really, the scripts is somewhere I'll start first. Of course, if I had a bigger team, maybe they'll be looking at different aspects like animation, physics, rendering, things like that. But for now, I'm just looking at the scripts, and just before I add new code in, I'm now going through it. I actually get a very good frame rate. I can hit a tremendously high frame rate if I quickly just press play here. Now, if I just let this run, and you can actually see live what it actually looks like. For the most part, it's well above 60 frames per second, which is exactly what we want. Every game standard should strive for 30 to 60 frames per second. Pretty much 60 frames is the standard, and so I should be hitting that. Occasionally though, that we are getting up to it, and this is happening usually when a script is potentially in a loop, so whether we're in a player loop or something like that, when it's an update, and these are the things we've got to try and fix. Now, update is one of the biggest issues with this. I've mentioned it before, is that update and fixed update and things like that, those functions are actually really cause a lot of frame rate drop. They'll end up calling multiple times a second. They'll provide a lot of garbage collection data. You don't really need update. I'm trying to move away from it because it's just you don't need it. Update is really good if you have a very small game, but a game like this, which is so big, I really can't afford to be doing things like that with a function that is basically activating multiple times per second. Now, if we break this down even further, we can see what's actually causing it, and you'll see that it's in the navigation control script, and it's set destination. Now, inside here we have a few scripts. If I just bring this over so it's easier to see, don't need to bring it that much. You'll see that we have our nav control, and set destination is what's causing the issue. Now, part of the issue is that I've already narrowed it down to being this right here. So the path.status is actually requiring a lot of processing power, because what's happening is it's calculating the path and then determining if it's available. So it's actually right here, calculate path. Essentially, it's essentially having to test all of its routes to a specific object, getting a command whether it's true or not, and then it's allowing me to control whether it is actually completed. This is only for me, and this is only for testing, so determine if it's unreachable or not. The idea is that this actually isn't necessary, because the NPCs will actually just go home when they've can't find a route. So this actually isn't necessary. This is just for me to determine, just for testing, to find out if our NPCs are able to reach certain locations correctly. This isn't as necessary anymore. The other thing to mention is that this is getting repeated every second. That's not too bad. However, it isn't actually necessary to repeat this every second. Bear in mind, you don't need to have things repeat and constantly test in games at all. The reason is because you should be determining everything based on a player's action. What I mean by that is, right now this NPC, this nav controller is controlling an NPC, and let's say that it's trying to find its way to a shop. That route to the shop won't change unless the player does something or something happens in the level that is determined by, let's say, code or an animation or something like that. The positions of the shop is not going to change until the player either destroys it or places a new one or deletes a path. When this happens, all we have to do is call set destination for when this happens. Instead, right now we're just calling it every second. Instead, what we should do is every time we alter the path system, which is what it's on, what it's using the destination for, every time we either delete a path or delete a object or delete something, a specific target, we should then call this set destination. The only time they should call this is, like I said, when the enemy when the NPC spawns in the world, they need to get a destination, or and then whenever it's called to find a new destination, it should call it then. If we alter the path, we need to call this, and if something happens to the buildings that the targets that they're trying to get to, then it'll call it. Otherwise, it shouldn't be calling it every second. Okay, so I've just skipped ahead and we're back now with the code that I've completed just to optimize the navigation. So now with our adventurers spawning, we got a little bit more optimized. So what I'm going to do is quickly show right here. In our adventurers, what's going to happen is every time a function is called, which is every 2 seconds, which we set here, so invoke repeating, so this will repeat every 2 seconds, and this will go through the standard behavior, the state of behavior for the adventurers, and every so often right down here it'll activate our set destination. So every time it comes through this, it'll activate. What I'm also going to do is I'll add in my own time at some point, is add in a quick bool. So we could optimize this even further by having this only activate once every few seconds if it's not already been previously activated and is already set on this. We'll do that later. I'll do that at some point. Okay, so let's use this as an example. So for every second we're getting 60 calls. This is from the previous code. If we left it as it was, that means that for every minute, for 100 adventurers, every minute it would be calling 360,000 times. Now, if we go with what we got now and we just base it on 1 second as opposed to 2 seconds, which we've got it on, that means it's getting called instead of 60 times, 1 time per second. Let's say it's being called every 1 second, just for the same example, as opposed to 2 seconds. And let's just use 1 second as an example. That means only once per second, so 60 times. And if we take that by 100, obviously we end up with 6,000. So as opposed to 360,000 times, we've now had 6,000 times. That is a significant change. That's a significantly improved piece of code right there. You can also see that in our destroy deconstruction script, when we destroy a specific building or something like that, you can also see that down here what we'll do is we also, after we play all our sounds, we build a new path. Building a new path is part of the placement script. This will get called, it's a function that I've got down here. And what it'll do is for each adventurer, what it'll do is it will find all of them and then set destination in their nav control. This means that whenever we destroy something or place an object, a specific building, the adventurers have to redo their destination, redo their pathing, and this means that this is only called when the player is essentially building things. If you're just in a dungeon, or if you're just waiting for time to pass or doing something else, at least this will only get called when that happens, as opposed to constantly. With that in mind, what I've done is I've also got right here, I've still got the calculate path, just for the bugging aspect, so that it calls the repath and the unavailable, just so I can see if things are unreachable when connecting things while I'm testing. But this will probably go away. This will probably remove this, so it's not necessary. So even more frame rate will increase. What we've also got is a massive change to how I've programmed the set destination. Should be a lot more optimized now, a lot more simpler. We're also warping the agent straight to the mesh, because sometimes some NPCs would spawn just slightly off the mesh, and so what this is doing is spawning on a start point and warping the object straight onto the mesh so that it doesn't accidentally not get spawned on it, or it just can't find it. Also setting the speed right here, and I think that's about it. Oh, and another thing is that I've optimized the search as well for finding objects. So now instead of having to search a huge catalog, a database of all these names in our hierarchy, now it goes to the specific item, so it will check for a specific item in this set. it'll just find the sub items for those things. So if it ends up finding managers, then it'll just go straight for and search for those items in here and then there. As opposed to before, it would go through the whole thing until it finds the right item, which could take a long time in this game. And I've done that for all of them, or for most of them in this case. There's still a few more I need to set up. Apart from that, most of the code is actually pretty okay. There isn't too many drops. We do have a drop here, but again, this is a second after, so this between here is a second, and this is when they're spawning in. We do have a few more codes which are done, like this one right here, fixed update. Right here is taking a tiny bit of time, and this is to do with trigger stay. Trigger stay is another really bad one that we don't want. Destroy deconstruction is a deconstruction script, and right now I'm using trigger stay. If we go and find that one as well, you'll see that this is our destroy deconstruction, and right now we're using stay on stay trigger. Now you'll see that even though nothing's happening right here, we're still triggering this trigger. We're still activating it every second, multiple times in fact in a second. This is because if there is no code, even if there's nothing that's happening within a function, it will still automatically get called, especially the triggers and the updates and everything like that. Even if there was just a start function with nothing in it, it would still call the start function. This is why you have to make sure to get rid of this type of thing and clean up your code. As you can see right here, this stay is not being used at all, and there's no reason to use the stay trigger. What I'm going to do is just going to get rid of it. The last thing is that I've tidied up my folders, and I've also grouped these into their own items. It was starting to get messy in the hierarchy, and it was also becoming very unorganized. So what I've done is I've made it a lot easier. So we got our scene audio, visuals, which is going to contain the camera and the post-process, volume. We got our canvas items, and we also got our scene items, which are put in their own objects for what they categorize as. From miscellaneous, which are just random items, to the things like the start point, which is where our NPCs are being teleported to, things like that, the ocean, different kind of things, just to keep things more organized. Of course, we've got our managers as well, which manage some kind of part of our game. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to go over this week. Hopefully the video isn't too long, we'll see. Next time we'll be going back to Blender, probably trying to finish off some monsters. This has been ProTaleDev, and I'll see you next time.